Okay, then. Hope you enjoyed Professor Salyers. He seemed prepared anyway, right? Well, so just soft opening. What do you think about worship? Having done the reading and looked through, or maybe are there things as you think about your own faith journey where you would say like worship has changed for me, or these used to be really important elements and now I might say I find these other ones, or even, hey, these have been big rocks in my faith journey the whole time.
Can I just,
Oh, please, Graciela.
okay. I didn't know whether if I raised my hand to somebody.
Go for it. You're good.
Well, this was very meaningful to me because I was raised Catholic and I attended Catholic school for 8 years. So there was no way you could get through Catholic school for a day without going through some very specific steps that included prayer, that included reminder of and you learned academic things also, but the prayers were always embedded into the daily life. They're very important. I think to this day, as an adult, I still cross myself before we go on, when we get in the car to go someplace, and just say a little prayer about getting there safely, because my mother always did that. Maybe it's maybe corny or silly or whatever, but for me, it's very much a central, the continuous, the prayers during the day, the quiet, that just take a moment, are very important in my life.
Thank you.
Well, it was interesting to study this, and it was also tied into our visit to the synagogue with Rabbi Fedorov, because he used terms I was surprised he used, liturgy, other terms that I thought, oh, I thought those were just kind of Christian terms, and he described their worship, included prayer, readings from the Torah. He also put hymns, and that was an interesting discussion he had on hymns. And then he gave a little homily or sermon, I don't know, and those are what we do, pretty much. Of course, we've added some to them. So it was interesting that our worship probably came out of the Jewish synagogue, if you will. And then we added some things to it, particularly our sacrament, at least two. At the very beginning, 2 sacraments, I know, communion, baptism. I think the others may have come later, but I'm sorry I missed last week when y'all discussed sacraments. So y'all may know more about that than I do. But it's sort of interesting to see the history of our worship, and it's been this way for maybe now over 2,000 years if you go back to the Jewish traditions, the temples and synagogues. So that's interesting.
I hope it's okay to say that actually contemporary Jewish liturgy came from Christian liturgy.
Okay.
Yeah, especially in this country, around the 1700s is when Reform Judaism sort of came around in Germany. And it was like, hey, looking around at how our Christian neighbors do this, like maybe we can reform how we do things. So there was like, this is when organs entered into the Jewish tradition. They came sort of in response to Christian worship. Obviously, there's, there are liturgies in Judaism that predate Christianity for sure. Although I would tell you, conservative and even Orthodox and Reform is a more reaction from Christianity.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I might add to that, just to give the history a little bit. And EFM, we had a 5th year. Normally it's a 4-year, we had it a 5th. One of the things we studied was the Didache, and you probably haven't heard of it because I don't know why we don't study it a little bit. Sometime maybe we should. But it was known to exist before the Christian theologians had it. Because there's writings of its existence from some of the old, Athanasius and Savius and things like that, but they didn't have it until finally in the 19th century. The writings were discovered, and what it is, it's an order of worship that was written probably in the late first century, maybe the second. But when you read it, you go, oh, that's what we do today. I mean, it discusses baptism and communion and how it should be administered. And in fact, baptism, there's two ways it mentions. One is immersion and the other is effusion, or pouring of water on the head. Doesn't mention sprinkling, by the way, but so if you wonder, well, when did we is effusion or pouring acceptable? It's been acceptable now for 2,000 years, because we have this argument of how do you baptize? Well, we dedicate, give you some idea about that, but it goes beyond that, and there's an order of worship in there that includes the Lord's Prayer and things. So it's kind of very interesting to see that. I was amazed when I read it that our worship today is very similar to what it was 2,000 years ago. So,
Wow.
sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where was it discovered?
Don't remember, maybe. Sorry, but it's about 16 chapters long, as I remember, and it's written in Greek.
Oh,
But there was a latter version in another way, maybe Latin that he's found later too, I think. So.
hmm.
And what you're pointing out is, I think, absolutely correct. And in our entire lives throughout the world, there are many, issues around medicine or around education or about raising children. Although we weren't mixed with all these different cultures, there are similarities across the cultures these things of development, of human development, are the same or similar in some ways. And I think prayer maybe is the same way, or the similarities.
Well, for me, I have two worship backgrounds, and in the first background, which was much less formal and varied a great deal from church to church, I never found any sense of awe or wonder. I don't think I even thought about God. I was going to church because my parents made me go, and it's what you do, and my mother decided when I was to be baptized, and so I was, and still it was like, I remember in my baptism, the thing I worried about most was they floated long stem roses in the water, and I was afraid of the thorns. This is like really, how awe-inspiring can that be? And then I came and was introduced to the liturgy in the Episcopal Church, and it was almost immediate that there was a sense of presence of God, of reverence and respect, and I love the liturgy, and at my worst and at my best, it speaks to me. So there's a big difference for me.
Well, we lived in a tiny town called Sour Lake, and when I was probably about 8 or 9, and so mother and I would go to the Sunday night church, and what it was, you backed out of the driveway, and there's beautiful surrounding of stars, because there wasn't any other lights around, and
Hmm.
I don't know, I've always kind of pinned the two together, and I love the singing part, that was my favorite. And I still do, actually, I keep gospel music on in the house a lot, and sing with it.
I have a couple of memories. One, is kind of a disappointing memory and the other is more awe-inspiring. When I was baptized, I was about 10-ish. And I was so proud and I felt so wonderful. And, like I had been accepted and, then I went home for lunch and we had a neighbor who came for lunch and she was very, very, very into the church. Same denomination, Baptist. And, I mean, they went every time the church doors were open. We went for Sunday school and church and that was about it. But I was so proud and we ran and told her, oh, I was baptized today. I was baptized today. And she just went, that's nice. And I mean, it was just so totally dismissed. Yeah, I was, oh, okay. I thought she'd be really pleased. And the other one was, I was younger and we had outside service. My grandparents lived in a real small town in East Texas and the revivals were held outside in a tabernacle, open air tabernacle, and lots of singing. And the night air and the stars were there. And I remember standing on the benches. I was so small. I would stand on the benches and I would sing at the top of my lungs, which I don't do anymore. I was told, don't do that. But I would sing, bringing in the sheets. The sheets. But my grandmother would bring in the sheets. Yeah, and so we'd come rejoicing, bringing in the sheets. Now, it made sense to me.
Yeah.
So,
Sweet.
yeah, yeah.
That's very sweet.
I might add that that's one of the reasons it was so important to me to renew my baptismal vows in Jordan, in the Jordan, because it really meant something. I'm sorry that I only got fear and all from the early experiences in church. I remember talking about the revivals. My brother's 5 years younger than me, so he was about 7. And he went to a revival with a friend and he came home crying hysterically. Mama, 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 I've got to be baptized. I'm going to hell. I've got to be baptized.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, how could somebody do that to a child? It had nothing to do with religion to me. It was like, how do you frighten a child that much? And looking back, it just makes me not have good feelings about that kind of worship. That it's punishment and not good feelings. No. I guess some of the holiest moments in worship for me have always come from music. That's really, really important to my worship. And sometimes being in the choir is not helpful because you can't listen and absorb. Although our choir is blessed with a leader that always emphasizes that we're enhancing worship, not performing.
Hmm.
And so it's like, you're very aware of the fact that you're not only praising God, but you're making a gift to your friends.
That is, nice. And you all are a gift.
Oh, we are so blessed.
Yeah.
Our music worship is far, far beyond what we should be able to afford. So,
Well, I have it interesting that the book here discusses how the worship engages all the senses. You know, whether it's the sounds we have there, the images or things around the church, smell, taste, touch, you know, and tries to engage all those so that if one of those appeals to you more than others, it maybe helps you.
that was another thing that the Episcopal Church brought to me, was that it's okay to have all kinds of feelings. And I can remember when I was first new to the Episcopal Church, it was a difficult time for me. And I remember going into the church, in the empty church, and yelling at God. And knowing that it was okay because I had begun to learn, you know, and instead of being so afraid to express my feelings, that was just monumental to me. And I that was the first place I worked as a church secretary, so I was at the church every day. And so I had the opportunity to go into the church whenever I wanted to, and there was just that sense of holiness that it just, I would just go and walk in and sit with it. And it really enthralled with the beauty of our liturgy and our beliefs and the sense of the love of God that comes through to me.
Well, I won't speak as beautiful to you, but the smell and the sounds come together for me when the incense sets off the firework.
Yes.
And
Here he comes in.
I have to turn it off. You gotta call fireman to turn it off.
And yet, there
Not
was
nearly as
never a
eloquent as
break.
you put it.
I was amazed. There was never a break. Everybody, the readers read it with, and I'm sure it was very difficult, but it amazed me that the service just kept right on. Maybe that's kind of like blowing the trumpets.
Got your attention, I'm sure.
Yeah.
When I travel and go up to Dallas or see the kids or whatever, I love that I can go to any Episcopal church and that we're all saying the same readings that Sunday. And I feel in communion with everybody, the whole Episcopal church, I suppose, at the time. And I love that part of the worship. But I also, in some respects, feel at my closest with God when I'm just, like you were saying, if I find myself alone in a church and it's quiet and it's dark, and I can just pray, and it feels, I guess, more one-on-one at that point, right? So I just feel very fortunate to have sort of the whole scope of things, being able to have that personal but yet corporate worship the same place.
I can really identify with the empty church and the closeness. When I joined the Episcopal Church, I was going through a really, really difficult time. And it was really a scary time for me too. And I would go into the church. Actually, we would have service and then everybody would leave. And I would go back in all by myself And actually, I didn't leave the church itself. I'd go into the nave. And then when they left, I would go back in and just sit. And I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go out there. Because in here, I felt safe. And I would just stay as long as they would let me.
So maybe I am just want to offer, this is really helpful to hear what's kind of going on for you, and particularly in your experience, and maybe just to like, maybe spiral a little bit deeper, right? I mean, worship in general means, what do I ascribe value to? So worship is an ascription of value. And maybe it's like to just sort of open the other door. Are there things that happen that block that for you? And not gonna hurt my feelings. This is truly an open question. Are there things that block that for you? And are there things that you would say like, I don't want to say the most, that's really a hard question, but like, are there things that continue to say like, sometimes this works for me, sometimes it doesn't, or like, maybe I have these experiences outside of a service, or these things typically in a service really help me direct where I want to put my value. Does that make sense? And I also want to say, like, because I'm not trying to change the conversation, I'm very pleased with it. I really like dark churches too. I like them dark, which is why, honestly, on Christmas Eve, I turn all the lights off. And at the Easter Vigil, I like it being really dark. And I like being alone. And I also, it sort of works multiple ways. And it doesn't always work at my own bidding, right? But I have these like really nice moments of like just very soft lighting. Or at the Easter Vigil, what I like, and since I like it, it's how we do it, I guess. We hold that candle for 40 minutes, right? There's no lights on in the church other than what the choir needs. So it is very dark. And I will say, to look out and see 100 little candle lights is like so beautiful to me. Like, I love the electric lights, and I wouldn't want to do it every week, right? Because it becomes like tedious or whatever, but it's like, feels very special that we're doing this by candlelight, if that makes sense. On Good Friday or Black Friday, I don't turn any lights on, and it's not dark, but it's pretty dark, and that feels very like actually container setting for me, like in a really good way.
If you did it every week, it wouldn't be special.
Well, then
On
that
those
might be
days.
it. Yeah.
And that's
All right.
part of what makes it so special.
I was raised in the Presbyterian church, and it was a large old church. It was a beautiful church. But my grandmother was Episcopalian, and from all my life, when I went to see her, I went to the Episcopal church. I got a firm religious foundation in the Presbyterian church. But as I got older, there were things about the Episcopal service. It seemed more holy. I don't know. It's just totally different from me. The vergers, the cross, the kneeling. And of course, when I started going, you had to cover your head. I mean, it was a beautiful, beautiful, dark church. It's probably, I don't know, 150 years old at this point. It's not criticizing either one. I just had a different religious, holy feeling in the Episcopal service. And yet, as a young teenager, I developed a very intense prayer life in the Presbyterian church. it was just a difference.
Yeah.
And I don't criticize the Presbyterian church today. It's had its struggles like everybody else, but I was happy there. But I decided at 18, I would become an Episcopalian. And I did.
Like Janelle said, you can go anywhere on any given Sunday, hear the same readings in any Episcopal church. And that keeps the continuity. You don't lose the 3-year cycle. You know, you don't go to a different church and hear a whole different sermon and then you miss the cycle, you know, and that's comforting to me. And some people that I've brought to church over the course of my life, they say, this doesn't make any sense. And I said, but it does. It does make sense. You just need to experience it. And then they would leave and they said, I don't know whether to stand up, sit down, roll over. I don't know what to do.
That was my mother-in-law.
Yeah. And I said, but it does make sense. You know, the times you kneel are the most holy time. And they said, okay, if you say so. You know?
She was Presbyterian and she called us junior Catholics. Literally, she did. Yeah,
Catholic life.
she was never comfortable in an Episcopal service, never. I finally got up and took her to Presbyterian service one Christmas Eve, just to, you know. But, we had a large Baptist presence in Waxahachie when I was
Yes,
growing up.
yes.
Yeah.
We also had the Assembly of God College. So you had a lot of them. And we could go to summer school there and get credits at our colleges. I mean, they had a good school. Boy, you talk about rigid. No lipstick, no makeup, sleeves, skirts. And it went on and on and on. We would come home from college and go into this other world 3 hours a day and then go into the real world and go to work.
I love that rigidity, and that's why I made sure I'd have long sleeves wherever I go. Nobody can ever accuse me of not having long sleeves.
And their religion was totally different than anybody in the classroom with me. But I respected them because they truly observed all of it and believed it. They practiced their faith. Ooh, they really did. They were better than a lot of us.
Well,
I don't know if it's better. It's not better, but
Yeah.
They were more compliant.
they were compliant, beyond compliant. Yes,
That's
that's
the word.
it. That's the word.
This is where it starts to get sticky, right? Is when
Yeah.
we start talking about how we observe other people. Because of course, sometimes it appears that people have really strong faith and you have no idea what they're thinking,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
And I would say, like, I am typically drawn to people who seem to have really strong faith, and I have to remind myself, you have no idea what their certainty is. It seems high. And this is like an important thing for me too, to think about, like when I go to not only different denominations, but when I go to places or even just think about, you know, like synagogues or mosques or whatever, right? And I know this is like maybe expanding what the book does, but obviously like worship in the synagogue and in the mosque is also meant to be ascribing value to, you know, metaphysical things and to God, right? And say this is like what is truly valuable. And so I don't know if you're interested in talking about this at all, but like when does observation become voyeurism? And when does curiosity turn into appropriation as opposed to inviting new ways of worship into my life.
Wow.
I was really struck at the Moss at the invitation to imitate their movements, their physical
Yes.
movements. Because I would have thought if I did that, it would be disrespectful
Mhm.
because I don't know the meaning of why you do certain things. And I thought it was beautiful and meaningful that we were invited to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could, being there and watching their prayers was a holy time for me. It was, I really had a great, strong feeling of worship in that place because of what they were doing, not because of what I was doing. And so I think that invitation made a big difference for those of us who were there.
I think it broke down a lot of barriers too.
Yes.
I do
Because,
too, though.
because you have a preconceived idea of what it's really like, and we really got to see it.
Yeah.
I feel like you're taking us, you reaching out to them and taking us was one of the nicest gifts I've ever had at a church is. Because we went as a community, not against, but open-minded to observe and learn and respect. I just thought it was a wonderful experience. Now, I didn't go to the synagogue because I had done that in Dallas with the big one. But the two I did go to, I think I really do. And I thought it
And a
was
lot.
wonderful to lead up to Lent, having done that.
So, and I wonder, I'm not trying to be controversial, but I wonder, could you imagine a moment in a worship service, you know, in which somebody adjacent or even somebody in the chancel does this and then proceeds to do the forward fold and then proceeds to get into the child's pose, which is the prostration. And what would that do to you?
I'd be okay with,
I'd be
but I would be worried about other people. Are they
Yeah,
gonna be okay?
are they, yeah.
I think
But-
that's one of the most beautiful things about St. Thomas and the way you have led us to grow. Because there are other Episcopal churches that would not be okay with some standing, some kneeling, different
I have
practices.
people ask me that, put the rubrics in so people know what they're supposed to do.
And I want to say that one of the things that, and this may not, it may just be me, but I love to watch Emerson when she comes up to the altar rail and stands there and watches. And I've noticed that the last 2 Sundays, she comes up there at the moment you begin the consecration. And she stands there and she watches, and it's like somehow she knows what's going on.
Well,
This
You know.
past Sunday, it was, I was watching that child and I thought, she is locked in. She did
Kathy
not,
Delgado took pictures of her and sent them to me, which I forwarded on to Donna.
Oh, I thought, I was gone last Sunday, and I thought, well, I won't have to worry about that, but then they sent me pictures.
Yeah, I actually would say, and maybe this is more a one-on-one, like, I'd be really happy if she wanted to come behind the table.
I've wondered.
No, I would be
when
happy
is
for
she
that.
gonna Enter,
yeah, she
you
was,
know,
yeah.
but it's, and.
Wouldn't
she-
be the first time kids come in there.
Yeah.
Right. And having the kids come inside the chancel at baptism, I think is beautiful. I've never seen that in another church. It may be customary, but it's just, it's so inclusive. That's our, our byword. The only thing that has ever bothered me in worship here is when the youth group kids are in the back row and they start misbehaving. Because,
they know that.
and some, I mean, this is very judgmental of me, but I think it's incumbent on the leader to put a stop to it, because that's not appropriate. That is disrespectful. And that's the only thing that has ever bothered me. Maybe it's because I have trouble with teenagers.
That's so adolescent.
I'm looking forward, very much looking forward to watching our youngsters as they move up into that age group with very different leadership and parenting and all of that. I mean, they're so wonderful. They're free, watching the boys come up to the front pew and not sit with their parents. You know, it's just, it's beautiful. It's just, it touches my heart.
So I want to come back to Muslim prayer posture, because I was meeting with somebody yesterday. Maybe I should tell you my story. When I was on Knowles, I can tell you I could have run that trip better than the trip leaders. This is what I do for a living. I do stuff, right? And look, I don't mean I'm the best, but there were like a lot of dead moments in transition time that was driving me nuts. And it occurred to me, like I just kind of had to submit. So I actually found myself doing the Islamic prostration pose. Not saying, do whatever you want with me, but I'm not in control of this. And I don't get to have control of this. So just for today, I'm going to try to let it be what it is. I don't know if it was helpful. I think it was. I think it was helpful. And I was talking to a parishioner yesterday who's struggling with a couple of family members, one of who's got like alcohol abuse, and another who is like, you know, maybe not like the marriage that this person wanted for their kid, right? And how they want to like change that. And it's like, yeah, and like there's the serenity prayer. And I wonder if you added the prostration to the serenity prayer, right? Because submission is usually a bad word for me. I wrestled. I'd rather get pinned than submit. Submission is the worst way to lose, because it means I can't even strive against you, right? I can't even fight back. And I don't like submitting. It's like not a family value. But I was really, you know, it was helpful for me to hear like, yeah, I mean, but consider you have to submit to the weather. And sometimes the way you submit to the weather is you put a raincoat on, because you can't control it. So you can control your response to it. Like, okay, I can deal with that angle on submission, right? And so maybe when it's tough, there is this posture of like, I submit. That I cannot make you do what I want you to do. And this is a way I can practice that with my body. And I actually found myself saying, like, I'm not giving you advice, but you might try this and see if it helps you grow into that submission that frankly is probably pretty holy, because, you know, getting ramped up about what other people do and how I need to fix them, I think is like the definition of anxiety. So I don't know when I would do the prostration pose in a service. I don't know. But I'm wondering when it becomes appropriation and when it becomes respect. And I'm also wondering, again, if there's impediments. So again, I just want to keep the conversation robust and open. I'm not trying to change it. But I'll say I find screens an impediment. And I was just at diocesan council, and of course they had screens because you couldn't see, and I hated it. Because to me, it maps to like this part of my brain. I don't want to say it is a performance, but it goes to the performance viewing part of my brain instead of the participation part. And I shouldn't say never, but I probably will say as long as I'm rector, I don't want screens in the church. This is different to me because this is about participation. And I wouldn't tell you, I mean, I would say firmly that churches that have screens, they're not doing it to perform. They're doing it to be accessible. I just know my own brain struggles with like keeping those distinct. Even if we're just putting words up on the screen, I'm looking, it like takes my attention somewhere else.
Yeah,
Mine
that's
too.
always
Yeah.
bothered me.
Yeah.
When
I mean,
I've
as a
been in
kid, it was
churches.
normalized.
Yeah,
But I think part of why I appreciate the Episcopal Church is there are these kind of weird traditions that feel very reverent to me.
Yeah.
Weird based on how I grew up. There's
Yeah.
the parade. The parade is still super weird to me, but like it felt reverent. And I would tell you, you never see me do this because I don't sit in the pew. But when I first came into the church I went to, is you always genuflected before you sat down and when you got up. You
Absolutely.
always did. Now, there's like 2 people that do that here. And I know this because I see you all. And that's not judgmental. It's just a different thing. And actually, I found it very attractive.
Mhm.
I did. And I still like kneeling because I don't kneel very often. Although, there's this, and it's like, it's all different, like as a priest and as somebody who's active, right? It used to be during the, the Sanctus, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Like in general, what most priests do is they put their head down and they do the cross, right? And, I got this kind of push since going to the synagogue that I'm gonna put my head up when I do that instead of down. Because that's how our Jewish brothers and sisters pray, right? Like,
Yeah.
so,
When I was a teenager at St. Peter's, Pasadena, and my friends were the acolytes, there are certain parts during the consecration prayer where the acolytes were behind the altar and they were prostrate
Mhm.
on the floor during that reading of that part.
Yeah.
And then they would come up, and that was something that I've never seen anywhere else. But I mean, they literally would lay down on the floor.
has anyone been to a service where the acolytes pull the chasuble out during the consecration? Because this is a thing in Anglo-Catholic traditions that the acolytes will pull the chasuble out on the priest so that it's like in all of its glory and not like contracted and folded. Like that happens places,
Yeah.
not here.
I don't know, in Ohio, they might have said, well, that's a high church.
Well, no, that is high church. In
That
fact,
is
that would,
very high.
that'd probably be what you'd also say Anglo-Catholic.
Yeah,
Comes from this
yeah.
tradition of like very high
We were just
mannerisms.
small town.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah,
but.
very true.
I couldn't tell you where the closest Anglo-Catholic church is. I'm unaware of where it is.
My
Here.
dad's church was very high church, and that was in the Heights. And he was there for a few decades. And it was considered like one of the highest in the area. I feel like I learned a lot about what I do ritually,
Uh-huh.
and still do, from him. As I recall, and I think he said that when priests were ordained, they used to
Prostrate before the
themselves,
bishop.
and yeah,
We don't do that anymore.
no. But
Nuns do that too.
when I
Nuns, yeah,
went to the
monks.
mosque too, I loved that they invited us to do that. And I also felt like, are you sure it's okay to do that here? Cause like, Episcopal. But I did do it, and I did go up and down and it brought me, it gave me feelings that I really enjoyed. I mean, I felt like, I don't know, I just really enjoyed being down there and, like you were saying, sort of submitting to the feelings and the prayers and I really enjoyed that. And I think if I saw somebody doing it in our church, I don't know, I think sort of like when growing up watching other people doing it and seeing what they were doing, I think, I'd be sort of inclined to maybe do it myself.
Well, there was, something we read. In Matthew 6. Where some were admonished because
Yeah.
they prayed just for people.
To be seen by others.
Yes, or
That's the Ash Wednesday reading, by the way. Beware of practicing your piety in order to be seen by others.
or they prayed aloud, long prayers just to babble. So, I mean, all of these things can be done wrong with them, but what's wrong with prayer? Nothing's wrong with prayer, you know, so
Yeah.
it can be done well too. Are you doing it for show, or are you doing it because it enhances the experience for you and hopefully for others too, you know?
Hmm.
And even, I think that was the verse that even said, go into a closed room, you know, well, that is acceptable for us, but we also find it acceptable to pray as a community, you know?
If you're looking for suggestion, I mean, I think it would be nice at the end of the service to have the lights just go dim. And instead of everyone just running out and shaking hands and leaving or getting ready for the whatever, just to be able to be invited to stay there and be in silent prayer and quiet. Might be nice.
I stay for the music.
That's it, that's a new thing.
Lately, everybody stays for the music, yeah.
And,
Not everybody, but many people do.
End of 8 o'clock then, you know?
Yeah.
that just sort of started on its own, I guess, did it, or how did that start?
It's a COVID gift, I think,
Yeah.
and plus having a concert pianist like helps.
Yeah.
Sure.
So nice. Family, you're giving a concert, you know, or it's not a whole concert, but I mean, you know, you're a beautiful piece.
Is he in school?
Yeah, he's graduating. He'll be leaving us in like
Ah.
May. Yeah, I mean, we knew this was a temporary gig. He's an organ scholar, not an organist. And he's still not actually an organist. That's like a side hustle. He really is a pianist and that's his goal. And he's been trying to pick up the organ, but good old Garmin's already got maybe an interview set up for the next one. So,
The
yeah,
last couple have been really good.
Well,
Good.
absolutely.
does the young man know where he's going? Is he going for graduate work?
I haven't asked that
I
question.
just wondered had he shared it. He's so good.
Ellen might know the answer to that, but,
Was he the one that played at Christmas Eve? Because it was beautiful.
oh, I think so. Yeah.
He said that he wants to take a year off.
Mm.
He's kind of burned out, as you often are when you finish so many years of schooling. And then he said, I don't know. I don't know what, but you can tell it will be piano, not just music, but it will be piano. Whatever path that takes for him, because that's his obsession his whole life. He comes down here on Saturdays and plays for hours and hours and hours.
He does,
Really.
like about 5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when he stayed with Garmin during one of, maybe Christmas, I don't remember anyway, during one of our breaks. And Garmin said he couldn't even practice what he was gonna play because Ben was at the organ all day, every day. So it's just, that's his life.
Where is he in school? Where's he graduating?
Is he U of H?
U of H.
Yeah.
U of H?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he will have his, like, if you will, concert exam. Sometime I think in March.
Wow. Yeah.
And we can go. Yeah. So he's gonna tell us time and place.
Should be.
And,
Yeah.
and the thing about the end of the service, Garmin has always said that the prelude and the postlude are part of the worship. They're a part of our liturgy, the opening and the closing.
Right.
So the clapping is so unorthodox for us, but it started out with just a few people,
Yeah.
you know, and then suddenly the majority of the 10:30 congregation is staying and listening. And I had one person say, I don't like that Ben fouls. That's what a performer does. And I, well, but he's, exactly, I said, if you applaud, then that's his thank you.
I think he really appreciates
Yeah,
that we enjoy the music, and that's just his way of saying it.
I think so too. And I think it's lovely and it's very unusual
And I'll tell you, as a priest, I get to hear what people don't like all the time. People don't like that I changed the word commandment to commitment, that this is the greatest commitment. It like vexes people more than you could imagine. And I refuse to change it. I refuse to change that, because I'm stubborn.
Well, back to your question about appropriation.
Yeah.
I think Matthew 6 would guide us there too. You know, are we doing it just to show, or does it really enhance?
Right.
Service and for you or for others?
I'd ask you about the candle altar. I don't know if that's meaningful for anybody in the room, but I would say, A, few Episcopal churches have them. B, we never had one.
Yeah.
C, when you see them, they're usually boxes, like tiers with a donation box. I don't know if it does anything for you, but I will tell you, because like I see it mostly lit up every Sunday.
Yeah.
So people
I
interact with it.
appreciate it. I use it.
I see
Not
people
all.
using it.
Oh, definitely people
and
use
it's
it.
meaningful.
Yeah.
It's very,
I don't think that's appropriative. That, I mean, that's very significant in the Orthodox tradition and in the Roman Catholic tradition too. Depending on the Episcopal Church, those are there. Most often they aren't. And we're not a high church. I mean, we're not a high church.
No.
So it was interesting upon introduction that it was pretty swiftly picked up by folk here to me.
And I don't mind things that other people like or enjoy or participate in. I may not, you know.
Do it yourself, yeah.
But if they enjoy it and it doesn't, what am I trying to say, take away from others' experience, then I think that's good,
Yeah.
So.
back to the Muslim call to prayer. That gave me chills. And I had sat down because I was one of the first people that walked in. And then but I was near a little group of women and a little girl. And I stood up and I went over and she looked at me and she went like this and so she said, you know, you could see with her eyes, she said, come on. And so I did participate in the whole thing. And at first I'm just buzzing around because, you know, I have FOMO too. And so then when I just started to just slow down my breathing, I got into child's pose and it was very meaningful. And then when it was all over, she gave me a hug. And it was just the sweetest feeling, the whole thing. So I really enjoyed it.
Does anybody do yoga? And do you realize that yoga is like a very prescribed way of Hindu spirituality and
Yes.
not an exercise component at all?
Yeah,
It makes me wonder if appropriation happens when you strip the spirituality out of a thing. I don't know if that makes sense. I would tell you most people who do yoga I know have appropriated it as an exercise class instead of as a way of like being embodied spiritually. Whether you're Hindu or Jewish or Christian, like a good yoga class, good yoga teacher, in my opinion, says this is not an exercise class, it's a breathing class.
yes.
But with your breath being the seat of your spirit.
For me, I'm a very physical person anyway. Physicality really means a lot to me. And when I would lift my arms inside, I lift my arms to you, Lord. And anything going down was bowing, reverence. So I incorporated, I know it's Hindu and I'm okay with that, you know, but the Hindu spirituality is connected to it. But I could use my Christian imagery and my Christian words to make it mine. It didn't have to be somebody else's spirituality, it was my spirituality.
So how is that not appropriation? I don't think it is, but I'm just curious.
Well, I had
I
back
did-
problems.
Oh, Graciela, please.
Yeah, I did yoga for a long period of time. It helped a lot in improving and helping my body stay balanced when I was long distance cycling and all of that. There is no doubt that kind of cycling and that kind of hiking is very intense. When I did my yoga, it was a way to just breathe that and relax into that kind of exercise, but yet not be out on a bike with wind blowing in my hair and trying to climb up mountains or whatever the heck I was trying to do. But there's no doubt that yoga is a form of prayer with your body, and your mind can very appropriately and easily just slip into that kind of mentality. It's quite beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. Yeah, I had back problems one time, so I had to go to physical therapy, so they gave me all these stretching exercises. And only later, I heard, well, those were yoga positions, so I didn't look at it as yoga, but, stretching, but, they share some things. But
My fundamentalist brother confronted me about my doing yoga.
Oh.
Really? Because it has a Hindu
Origin, yeah.
Tell him it was physical therapy.
Well, did you confront him about December 25th being Christmas?
No, I don't. I am done with confronting.
Yeah.
It does no good. Creates tension.
Yeah, it is an interesting
I
thing that
accept who he is.
I actually am very not wary of appropriation. I'm not, many people are nowadays, especially, and without realizing, I think that, hey, December 25th is a substitute for a pagan holiday. And Easter actually is a pagan word. It's a pagan holiday that has to do with fertility, and it's made it into English, which is really strange, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Easter it's a pagan word. Beyond that, many of you know the rosary comes from Islamic prayer beads, which probably came from Buddhist prayer beads. And the word we use for that stuff is syncretism. SYNCRETISM. That's when one culture encounters another and sees a meaningful practice that is not indigenous and says, let's bring that in to our way of life. Definitely changes some of it. There's more beads on the rosary. There's a cross on the rosary. You don't recite 99 different names for God, although I suppose you could, but they Christianized the rosary. And most people are like, well, no, that is an appropriation. I just want to put it out there because depending on what circles you run in, appropriation is like a really big deal. Whether you can and should, or how you approach those things.
I don't see it as a negative thing. I see it as, like you said, curiosity, turning to respect, turning to, this is meaningful to me and I'm going to incorporate it into my worship. It's a ritual or a movement or a thing that brings me closer, that allows me to connect with. There was a time when I left the Episcopal Church, corporate church, in a time of rebellion, and did a lot of exploration in different denominations and different world religions. And I connected with the Buddhist practices a great deal, and learned that there are a lot of Buddhist and Christian philosophies that are very similar and compatible. And some of their practices I incorporated into my nightly devotions. I had a bedroom where there was a loft and a ladder, and I would go up the ladder, and I had an altar. So I was going, just the fact of going up was symbolic for me, moving up. And I would meditate and prayers, and on the altar, I had various things that meant things to me. There were some Buddhist things, I had a cross, I had the Pieta, on it. I mean, it was incorporation of things that had spiritual meaning to me. And I didn't feel like I was being disloyal or it was helpful. So I feel like, Graciela mentioned earlier, some of the things that you did, and you said maybe it's silly or something. I don't think anything we do is silly if it enhances our worship. So, I'm done. I'm sorry.
No, you're
So I'm one of those people that is synchronicity, syncretic or whatever.
Syncretic, I think is the
Syncretic,
word,
there we go.
yeah.
There we go.
So the Catholic Church, they have the rosary.
Mhm.
The Episcopal Church has their own sort of
Anglican prayer
version,
beads.
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And I have always felt closer, I don't know, to doing the rosary, the Catholic rosary, and doing the Hail Marys. And I will do that in prayer a lot. And I haven't really gotten into the whole Episcopal
Mhm.
beads necessarily, but I feel there are times when I really, I need to pray to Mary, and I, I will do my Hail Mary, and I will do the whole rosary, and that brings me closer, but I have fundamental family members too.
You hide them from her.
And yes, they are very much against me doing prayers to Mary,
Mhm.
because that's just, you need to be
Idolatrous, yeah.
praying to
Were you
Jesus and only
Catholic?
Jesus.
Were you Catholic?
No, I've been a cradle Episcopalian.
How interesting.
Yeah, but I find comfort there.
I had a great aunt that was Catholic. And all the rest of us were Episcopalian. But I just wondered, the rosary, did you attend their services so that you learned to do this and incorporate it?
When I was young, I went to a Catholic funeral.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was really my first exposure.
Mm.
Yeah. And then I learned it.
I went to a Catholic funeral, I don't know, about 10 years ago. And it was the first time I ever participated in the rosary. And I could absolutely see where that was. It's like chanting, and it's comforting after a while, and yeah,
You could do that.
you could do that.
Yeah.
And it was calming. And I could see where it was important to the service and to a funeral too.
I'm also an advocate of developing your own rituals.
Yeah.
If it has meaning to you, whether it's church or denomination related. My son was killed in a wreck, and I went to the site of the wreck, walked that, and then I went to the wreck yard where the car was, and I saw the car, and I climbed up on what was left of the bumper and reached back in all the mangled stuff and pulled out a shirt. There was also a Book of Mormon in there, and I pulled that out.
Mm.
And I don't know why I did that. I just needed to do that. And then I boxed it up and I put it away up in the closet. And then a year after his death, I took that shirt out and I washed that shirt. Sand and blood and oil flowed into the sink. And I washed that shirt and cried and cried and cried and washed that shirt and washed that shirt until it was clean. It was as if I were washing his body. And then I took it out and I hung it on a hanger outside on the balcony, and the wind blew it. It was like a prayer flag for me. To me, that was the most meaningful ritual to help me with his death, much more than any funeral. We had a Mormon funeral in Albuquerque, and we had an Episcopal funeral when I took him back to Lubbock. And they were good. That was good. I did that. But it was that year later that I had my own ceremony, my own ritual that was the most healing for me. And as I tell you, I can still feel that sense of letting him go, giving him to God. And that's an image that I used with him all his life. I can't handle him. God, you take him. I can't do anything about this. You've got to do it, God, take it. I didn't mean kill him. I just meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Help him.
Yeah, the serenity prayer. And so it was kind of that cycle of letting him go. Maybe I felt his soul go. Very possible. Thank you. Thank you.
I would say I saw something similar in 2017, not exactly, but in 2017, when we went to Israel as a group, we went into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it's got like 4 stations of the cross, like right there. And one is like part of the tradition, there's like this slab, I think it's marble, that supposedly is where Jesus was laid when he came off the cross, right? And this is like leading up, it was like 2 weeks before Holy Week, maybe is when we went. So it's starting to get more and more pilgrims. And there were these, like, for lack of a better word, these like Orthodox babushka looking women, right? They had like the babushka thing, and they were anointing this thing with oil, and the thing had to be just totally full of oil, but they were anointing this thing with oil, and they were weeping over this slab, and I have to say, like, I don't want to do that, but like, I want to do that. Like, it was like, like I couldn't enter that headspace, but I just found it so compelling that they were having essentially this, like, they were like washing the dead body of Jesus through their oil and tears. Did anybody else see that? Did anybody see that?
I don't remember that.
No.
It's interesting how you can all go on the same trip and you all have very different memories.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Herb has some I don't have, right? Because, like, that's where you saw value, right? Which, again, coming back to worship, is about ascription of value. I thought about buying a prayer wheel. I don't know if you know those. They're like these Tibetan Buddhist things, and you like spin them.
Yeah.
And that, like, puts your prayer in motion.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't get one. I found somebody who would do. I don't mean for home, by the way. I don't mean that for home. Anyway, I didn't do it. There is, like, something really lovely for me about when talking to somebody who is Muslim, particularly when they've come from a Middle Eastern context. When they wish you peace, they usually put their hand on their heart, like so, right? Which is an interesting gesture. We don't really do that much, other than, like, when you say the Pledge of Allegiance, so that they take the time to, like, do this thing while they say peace to you is really interesting to me. And I can't do namaste because it so permeates the yoga culture, which I find to, like, not help. Although I love the idea behind it, right? That you say, like, the sacred in me salutes the sacred in you, namaste. Like, I like that idea, but I almost think that has been too appropriated for me to engage in. But this one hasn't. So, like, I find this one should be really nice. I guess if it's authentic, yeah, who knows? But I find that one to be lovely.
I do that at the absolution.
Ah.
After the sign of. the
You
cross.
stay
Then
there.
I keep my hand over my heart to just be in the moment.
I don't know if you know that there's something called the priest's handbook. Priest's handbook, and it tells you as a priest all the hand postures you're supposed to make during the Eucharistic prayer, how to dress traditionally so that you get it right. And I'll tell you that when I first started in the Episcopal Church, and granted I hadn't really grown up in it, I was like a lay kind of chaplain at this church, and the associate who was paid got pregnant, and ultimately she didn't come back after having the babies. And but she was like mentoring me or talking to me along with the rector, and she said, you need to get this handbook, because she'd gone to a seminary where that was really important, general seminary. And I would tell you probably that other one, the Shoda House, is really big into the priest's handbook so that you do it right. And I ordered it and I had it on my desk, and my mentoring rector came in and he saw it and he was like, what the hell are you doing with that book? And I was like, oh, well, Terry told me to get it. He's like, Terry was a good priest before she went to general seminary, and it ruined her. He said, throw that book in the trash right now. I don't ever want to see it again, because there's nothing wrong with your piety. So do what's authentic to you and don't do that. And I think they're both partially correct. But I will tell you, I don't ever find myself doing this with my hands, and I don't do the Iran's position because I find it really uncomfortable and awkward.
Yeah.
I do this, like time to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
That's the universal gesture for time to stand up, right?
Right.
This is like unwieldy to me, but it's the right motion. And I can't, according to the handbook, right? My priest told me, my mentoring rector said, listen, I don't know about adults, but children can smell when you're inauthentic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So don't do anything that's not authentic. Like if it learns to be authentic, okay, but don't get up and do it until it is. And the other mentorship I got is there's the prayer book and then there's your prayer. And yes, in some ways you're leading people through the service, but if it isn't authentic, it's a disservice. So for better or worse, that's why I changed some of the words, because that's my prayer. The one in the book you can all read.
I guess good advice. It shouldn't feel authentic, you know.
Yeah.
And you can also say like, hey, sometimes it feels authentic to throw your trash on the floor and you need to pick it up. Right. So like there's always room for like consideration. But I think what he was trying to say is, and I ran into this line yesterday, and for better or worse, sometimes tradition is peer pressure from dead people.
Repeat that sometimes.
Tradition is peer pressure from dead people. And peer pressure can go both ways, right? It can be positive or it can be very harmful.
Yep.
Conformity for its own sake, harmful. Conformity because like the pattern of life is like good and you haven't figured it out, that's helpful. And I'll tell you as a priest, like I struggle with this stuff, like, hey, how much is this just me wanting to be creative and different? And how much is this being authentic? And like, where's the line and all of that for everybody else? Because if I overindulge in what I want to do, it may not meet anybody else's needs.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the Episcopal faith is tradition. It doesn't mean we can't change, but it's a vote for like you say, those who aren't there.
Yeah, and
we are all Episcopalians, whether dead or in the future, you know. So how do we incorporate all of it?
hopefully we include reason
Yes.
and scripture.
Yeah.
And we don't just lean on tradition. We say, is this reasonable? Is it reasonable? Or sometimes tradition works like over against our reason. Like this doesn't seem reasonable, and yet I do find it very worshipful.
Yeah.
Like it works even though I don't get it. Yeah.
And speaking of tradition, you used the word rubric a little bit ago
Oh,
to
yeah.
talk about the positions maybe we take in different parts of this order of worship. But rubrics are beyond that. I've seen conversation with another priest who goes, communion, the rubric on communion is you offer it only here. So where's the book of rubrics?
Well, it's all in the Book of Common Prayer. And
Is
what
it?
you'll
Okay.
find is, if you read, for example, Eucharistic prayer, right to prayer A, it'll like kind of looks like our bulletin. But then if you look at the end of all the Eucharistic prayers, and there's 4 in right to A, B, C, D, then there's like concerning the Eucharist, and you'll get additional rubrics.
Okay.
And I'll just go ahead and tell you, like I do have a clergy friend who loves to tell me when I don't get the rubrics right. And it's almost like, and I have to try to figure this out. And my response is usually like, because to be honest, like, and I do struggle with this, like in general, I find that to be like aggressive and not like well-intentioned. I'm just going to be honest. I find it that way because you're telling me I'm not doing it right. And that's probably not how it's intended. That says more about me than anything else. And usually what I say to people who tell me I'm not doing it right is, well, I'm the rector and categorically I am right, unless the bishop tells me I'm wrong, but you can't, only the bishop can. And canonically, that's true. That's my trump card is the rector decides, right? And, but I also will tell you, and the other response I say is, I didn't swear any oaths on the prayer book whatsoever. I didn't. I said scriptures hold all things necessary for salvation, and I'll conform to the doctrine and discipline of the Episcopal Church. I didn't say anything about the prayer book. And if I disagree with the prayer book, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm just going to tell you, like the prayer book does not own me. And I also mentioned, like, if I can disagree with the Bible, which I do, I can certainly as hell disagree with the prayer book because the Bible's of higher authority. To be honest, I mean, for me it is. Yeah, that's because I grew up low Protestant, but like, and this is where it all has to like kind of be figured out. It just has to be figured out. How and when do you do what, right? The prayer book does not include everybody in the Eucharist. It doesn't. The prayer book does not have gender neutral language. I don't know if you heard Don Salyers use exclusively gender inclusive language. First presenter to do it that we've had in the course. He believes that's good liturgy. I think he's right. It's not traditional, and the tradition's wrong. I'm just going to tell you, it's wrong for me. For me, you don't have to do it my way, but it's my prayer. Like I'm leading the prayer, so it's important that I do what's. If I refer to God in the masculine sense, it'd be hard for me. Yeah, it would be hard. I think it would come from an unhealthy spirituality in me. And I don't think you deserve it. I don't think you want that, even if you think you do. I don't think you want that from me. Well, look, it's 10:30.
All those rubrics are written in the book of Common.
They are, and if you ever want to look for them, I can help you find them in the book itself.
I may go back and, because I sometimes skip over those paragraphs, when you're and go back and read them a little closer.
I'll give you an example of a rubric. You can't celebrate do you know this? There's 2 days a year you can't celebrate the Eucharist. There's only 2 days. According to the prayer book, you can't do it. And I probably could get in trouble if I did. I'll keep the rubric and not celebrate it. Those days are Black Friday and Holy Saturday. Cannot celebrate the Eucharist those days. So instead, I serve the reserve Eucharist. That's in keeping with the rubric, and it's also giving you nourishment for high holy days. I'm not trying to get around the rule. I'm actually keeping the rule. And the point of the Eucharist, as I understand it, is nourishment. And of all days of the year, those ought to be days of nourishment. So there's ways you can keep the rubrics without Cause I don't want it without being like owned by them, right?
Well, the Catholic Church,
Oh, Tim, please.
like the Catholic Church, on Holy Thursday, they take the Eucharist out. But on Friday, they bring the host back in and hand it out.
Yeah, well, that's what we do, is I over consecrate on Thursday. And then I take everything out of the chancel and the tabernacle. There's nothing there. I leave it in the middle of the nave, the central aisle. That's where we're nourished from on Black Friday and Holy Saturday. And then during the Easter Vigil, you put it back. So we do it that way. We do it that way. Okay, thanks for staying 5 extra minutes. Next week, we'll talk about discipleship.
And I should have said, I think you think there's